Okay, are we ready to start? Okay, so we'll start with the homage to the Buddha. We'll just do it one time. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to him, the blessed one, the worthy one, the fully enlightened one. Okay, so good morning, everybody. And this is actually, it's the day after the Vesak. Vesak was actually, the formal official Vesak was yesterday. That is the day celebrating the birth, the enlightenment, and the passing away of the Buddha. And so it's known, nowadays it's known as the International Buddha Day. But we just continue in our own humdrum way with the regular sutta class, no special celebration. I remember an elder Thai monk, when I was living in Washington, D.C., used to say that for him, every day is Vesak. Okay, so we are continuing now. We are reading in the Anguttara Nikaya Book of Fives. There's a group of suttas on the called the Anagata Bhaya Sutta. These are the discourses on the dangers of the future, the perils of the future. So there are 4 suttas that share that same theme, and we've already gone through 2 of them, and now we have 2 more to go. So this will be, first we take number 79. Okay, and this is, the Buddha's addressing this to the bhikkhus, to the monks, and these special dangers concern aspects of monastic life. Okay, so you can see on the screen here. Okay, so the Buddha says here, he opens that there are these 5 anagata bhaya, 5 future dangers, future perils that have not yet arisen, but that will arise in the future. And then he gives a word of caution. He says you should recognize them and make an effort to abandon them. So what are these 5 dangers? Okay, the first, is the text large enough? Let's increase the size a little bit. In the future, there will be monks who are undeveloped in body, undeveloped in their sila, in their conduct, here translated virtuous behavior, undeveloped in mind, and undeveloped in wisdom. So 3 of these are familiar aspects of the training. We have here sila, and then what's called here the citta. I think its word is citta. Yeah, I don't have the note. But I'm sure it's citta, undeveloped in citta. And so we have sila, citta, which really represents samadhi, the development of meditative concentration. And the third is panya, wisdom. So those are the 3 main aspects of the Buddha's training, common for whether lay people or monastics, doesn't matter. One has to train in observing good conduct, that is sila, virtuous behavior. One has to train the mind in samatha, serenity, or samadhi, concentration, to collect the mind. And then one has to train the mind through direct insight, which brings panya, or wisdom. So that is the 3-fold training. And then we have a 4th here, which is a bit puzzling or problematic. The word is, in Pali, is kaya, which literally means body. So here it's undeveloped in body. So if you maybe take it very literally, it would mean that the monks of the future are not doing weightlifting, calisthenics, not developing strong muscles. But I don't think that's what is intended here. And the commentary is not all that helpful. It just says that actually the commentary to the Anguttara Nikaya doesn't even comment on this expression, but the Sarabhakasani, this is, I think, the Samyutta Nikaya commentary, explains as undeveloped in the body of the 5 sense doors, which again is not very helpful. But and so I conjecture that that probably refers to sense restraint of the senses. But I suspect that the term might refer to maintaining clear comprehension of the body in the various, what's called the modes of deportment and various bodily activities. And so in the discourse on the 4 foundations of mindfulness under the heading of Kaya Anupassana, contemplation of the body, we have one of the exercises is called clear comprehension. And in that section, it explains that the practitioner goes forward, maintaining clear comprehension. When coming back, maintains clear comprehension. When standing, sitting, lying down, bending and stretching the limbs and all the different activities of the body, one practices clear comprehension. So I would take the liberty of interpreting being undeveloped in body means that they're not practicing clear comprehension in their bodily activities. And what is meant by clear comprehension here in this context, when you are doing something, you know that you are doing it. You're doing it with full awareness of what you are doing. So when walking, one knows I'm walking. When standing, one knows one is standing. When sitting down, one knows one is sitting. Lying down, when speaking, keeping silent, moving the limbs, whatever one does with a clear awareness of what one is doing. And we see in the suttas that there are some passages which mention how observers, people who are observing the monks as they're going about their activities, develop faith in the Buddha's teaching or trust or confidence in the teaching just by observing the movements of the monks or the nuns when they're engaged in their activities. Maybe the most famous example of this concerns a young wanderer who was known at that time by the name of Upatissa. And he had searched all over India for a spiritual teacher without success. And then one day, when he was outside Rajagaha, he saw a monk, one of the first disciples of the Buddha named Assaji, going on an alms round, and he was observing him. He saw that the way that monk Assaji, the way he walked, so impressive. When he stood in front of the house waiting for the alms food to be offered, again, he was very impressive. Then when he continued walking, very impressive. So he was impressed by all of his movements, just the way he didn't know anything about the teaching that this Assaji was following, but just observing the bodily movements of that monk made him think, this monk is either an arahant, a fully liberated one, or on the path to arahatship. And then when the monk finished his alms round, the wanderer Upatissa approached him and said, what is your teacher? Who is your teacher? And what is the teaching that you're following? And then Assaji explained, he said, my teacher is a offshoot of the Sakyan clan by the name of Gautama, but we refer to him as the Buddha. and it's his teaching that I follow. And then the wanderer Assaji said, please tell me the essence of that teaching. And then Assaji, he was very modest, so he said, the teaching is very deep, very profound, and even though he was an arhat, he said, but I am just a beginner. I can't really explain it in detail. But Upatissa said, please tell me just the essence of the teaching. And then Assaji recited a 4-line stanza. Whatever dhammas, whatever phenomena or things there are that arise from a cause, our master has explained the cause, and also he's explained their cessation. That is the teaching of the great ascetic. And upon hearing this, Upatissa immediately gave rise to the eye of Dhamma, the eye which sees into the true nature of things. And he became a stream enterer, a sotapanna. And then he went with another friend of his to the Buddha and became accepted into the order of Buddhist monks. And thereafter, the wanderer Upatissa was known by the name of Sariputta, the one who became the disciple foremost in wisdom in the Buddha's teaching. So it was just by observing the monk Assaji moving on his arms round with those mindful, slow movements of the body, fully aware, done with full, clear comprehension, that was enough to inspire such trust in Sariputta that he became first an inquirer and then a follower of the Buddha. Okay, so we have monks here in the future who are the opposite of that. They are undeveloped in body. So they just move in a very casual, muddled way. I'm sorry to say, but often you can see monks these days moving in that way, just without that sort of self-containment, without that inner composure, just in very casual, sloppy ways. So they're undeveloped in body, not observing the precepts, not disciplining themselves in accordance with the code of precepts, not devoted to the practice of bhavana, of meditative development, and without wisdom. And yet, even though they're not developed in this way, but still, as they go on in their monastic life, gaining in seniority, they reach a point where they start giving full ordination to others. And so they may be somewhat ambitious to acquire an entourage of disciples, and so people come to them, they want ordination, and then, or they try to lure others in, come, you become my disciple, and then they give them ordination. But even though their disciples now get ordained with them, but they are not able to train them because they're not trained themselves, they're not disciplined themselves, so they're not able to train others in the higher virtuous behavior, the superior virtuous behavior, the superior mind, the mind of samadhi or meditative concentration, or in the higher wisdom, the wisdom of insight into the nature of things. And so we have the teacher, undisciplined. He's ordained a bunch of disciples, also undisciplined. And then those disciples become also, unless they are very scrupulous, they remain undisciplined in body, in their behavior, in their mind, and without wisdom. But as they go on in time living the monastic life, they gain in seniority, and then they give ordination to others. But they're not able to train their disciples in the higher good behavior, the higher meditative mind, and the higher wisdom. And so in this way, you go from generation to generation. The ordination is passed on. sort of the outer form of the monastic life is passed on, but the distinguishing features, what should be the distinguishing features of the monastic person, that restraint and composure of the body, the conduct that conforms to the rules of discipline, the training of the mind and the development of real wisdom, that is lacking. And so here we have an interesting statement that through corruption of the Dhamma, of the teaching, comes corruption of the discipline, and from corruption of the discipline comes corruption of the Dhamma. So it seems that what this passage is suggesting is that the reason why this sort of lack of training in clear comprehension of the body, in conduct, in meditation and wisdom, where that originates from is some kind of corruption of the Dhamma. So I try to think of some ideas that sort of slip into, even into the early texts, that can lead to this, well, to this doctrinal corruption, and then suggesting a corruption of the discipline. And one example that comes to my mind is in the middle-length discourses, the Majjhima Nikaya, it's sutta number 22. There was a monk by the name of Arita who went around, he somehow grasped the idea that the way he expressed it, that those things that are declared to be obstacles by the Buddha are not really obstacles for a monastic who indulges in them, who engages in them. And the way the monks and the Buddha understood what Arita was saying is that there's no harm in a monk indulging in sexual enjoyment, in sexual pleasure. And so this was, though there's no evidence that Arita actually did this himself, but he was expounding this as a belief that he had held. So this would have been a corruption of the teaching if it was accepted by others and became propagated. And so if you hold to that as an idea, that there's no harm in indulgence in sensual and worldly sensual pleasure, then the impact, the effect is going to be that those who accept that are not going to observe the discipline of sensual restraint, and they'll just take on the liberty of indulging in sensual pleasures. And I don't like personally to criticize any other forms of Buddhism, but we have to say honestly that there comes into later Buddhism, in certain texts, we call them tantras, the idea that sort of the ultimate highest spiritual practice is to be able to engage in sexual union without being defiled or corrupted. And that's supposed to be like the way to eliminate passion is by indulging the passions. And so you could say, when that becomes a doctrine, then certainly it will lead to practices that were taking place in some of the charnel grounds, the cremation grounds in northern India in maybe the 9th, 10th century, that there would be like groups of practitioners, but they were not monastics, but maybe also it affected the monastics. But they would gather with usually it would be like the outcast girls, the Chandala girls, and they would be the yoginis, and the male practitioners would have sexual union with them. And they would say, like, this is the way to the highest enlightenment. Yeah, so that is a kind of maybe corruption of the Dhamma that leads to a corruption of the discipline or practice. I don't know what went on in the monasteries that were following Tantric Buddhism in northern India or in Tibet. But I think in Tibet, in the true monasteries, the discipline is pretty upright, not corrupted. Okay, I don't really want to make judgments about forms of Buddhism that I don't have practical acquaintance with. But another idea that we find in the early texts as a kind of corruption of the Dhamma is the idea that this is a belief in self, that it is the same self that wanders on from life to life, retaining its identity. So this would be a corruption of the Dhamma. It was propagated by a monk named Sati. Again, in the Majjhima Nikaya, it's sutta number 38. So he said, in my view, it is the same consciousness that transmigrates from life to life. Yeah, that's a corruption in doctrine. I don't see that necessarily entails a corruption of the discipline, but an idea that did come in, well, actually it came into Japanese Buddhism at a certain point, that it was in one of the offshoots of the Pure Land school that we have become so corrupted, our minds are so weighed down on defilements that we can't really strive diligently to follow the training anymore, but we have to rely entirely on the grace and compassion of Amitabha Buddha to save us. And so this was a monk named Shinran, who then gave up his monastic vows and became a layperson and established a sect of Buddhism called Jodo Shinshu. But actually, I have a lot of respect for Jodo Shinshu. The practitioners are very sincere and dedicated, but I have to disagree with this idea that we become so bogged down by the weight of our defilements that all effort is futile, and all we can do is depend on the grace of Amitabha Buddha to rescue us. So in that case, when you have this, what I call a wrong idea that we can't make any progress in our training through our own effort, then one gives up the discipline and just, they will observe the 5 precepts, but not much more than that. Okay, but there might have been sort of precursors of that idea already slipping into Buddhism, maybe in some form, even during the Buddha's time. Okay, so the Buddha says, like, this is a future danger that will arise, that has not yet arisen, but will arise in the future. So you should recognize it and make the effort to abandon it. Okay, so this is a first danger. So this is actually, the next one is really just a variation on that. Let's see if the note here has anything of interest. Okay, so how is it that when the Dhamma is becoming corrupt, the discipline becomes corrupt? It says when the Dhammas of serenity and insight, that samatha and vipassana, are no longer being nurtured, no longer being practiced, then the 5-fold discipline no longer exists. And when there is no discipline of restraint among those who are immoral, then serenity and insight, calm and insight are no longer being practiced. Okay, now we'll come to the second danger in the future. Okay. Okay, again, we have the monks who are undeveloped in body, conduct, mind, and wisdom. And then they will give dependence to others, but will not be able to train them in the higher virtuous behavior, higher mind, and higher wisdom. Okay, what is meant here by dependence? The Pali word, as indicated in the note, is nisaya. Okay, so this is a procedure which is laid down in the Vinaya or monastic training, by which a junior monk, one who is newly ordained, takes nisaya, a state of dependence or guidance, from a senior monk, usually his preceptor or teacher. And then there's a similar procedure prescribed for bhikkhunis or fully ordained nuns. So even when you get full ordination, it doesn't mean that you just go off and become an independent meditator or independent to start teaching others, thinking I'm ordained. But you're supposed to spend 5 years under the guidance of a teacher in which you learn the training, the Vinaya, the discipline, in which you're supposed to undergo the training in meditation, study of the texts. And right after one takes ordination, then one approaches the senior monk, one's teacher or preceptor, and says, Bhante, please be my teacher. I will be your pupil and I will live in dependence on you. And then the teacher will say, yes, I accept you, or so be it, or very good, something to show that he accepts the junior monk as his pupil. And then at the end of the 5 years, then you go to your teacher or your senior monk and you say, please, I request now to be released from guidance, released from dependency. And then if the teacher thinks you are qualified to become independent, he'll approve of that. But if he sees that you still need more discipline, then really, he should say you're not yet ready to become independent. You still have to continue your training. So that is like the ideal old system. It's pretty almost like a kind of guru-shishya relationship. So it's not like the guru in Hinduism where you worship the guru as like an embodiment of the divine, but it's a direct sort of personal training and transmission from the teacher to the pupils. Nowadays, I have to say, in the Buddhist countries of Asia, particularly maybe Sri Lanka, that kind of old system is broken down. Now they have the parivenas, where it's pretty much like a school where the monks go to, and then they take their education, almost like in a very academic type of setting, no longer the highly personalized, highly spiritual training that took place in older generation. Okay, but here we have the case where the monks are undeveloped by way of their body conduct and so on, and they give dependence to others, but they're not able to.
No.
What was that? It was coming from online?
My apologies.
Okay, I muted. Yeah, I have to ask people, please mute. I thought somebody was offended by something I said. Okay, so these elder monks who are not trained themselves give dependence to others, but not able to train them. And then those in the later generation, when they gain seniority, they give dependence to those in the next generation. And so it passes on and on and on. But you have generation after generation of those who are not properly trained. And again, through defilement of the Dhamma comes defilement of the discipline, from defilement of the discipline, defilement of the Dhamma. Okay, so that's the second danger of the future. The third Yeah, this is an interesting one. Okay, so we have monks who are undeveloped in body, conduct, mind, and wisdom. Then we have here the expression, while engaged in talk pertaining to the Dhamma, then it's translated here in questions and answers. They will slide down or slip into a dark Dharma, but will not recognize it. And then again, through defilement of the Dhamma comes defilement of the discipline. From defilement of the discipline comes defilement of the Dhamma. Okay, let's look at the note to this. Yeah, so the translation here, or the original text that's translated is Abhidhamma Katang. So that is what is translated as talk or discussion, talk pertaining to the Dhamma. And then what's translated as questions and answers is Vedala Katang. Now these are two terms that come to play an important role in the development, the later development of Buddhism. Okay, we have here Abhidhamma Katang. And now this word Abhidhamma comes to, in time, to designate a particular collection of texts different from the Sutta Pitaka, a collection of texts that give a very detailed, technical, systematic presentation of the Buddha's teaching, a kind of very refined, I've called it a kind of philosophical psychology, classifying all of the terms of the teaching, building up a complex system of states of mind, mental factors, material phenomena, and their relationships. But we don't find that something quite like that in the early discourses. But here we have what seems to be suggesting maybe the origins of this in talk, what's called Abhidhamma talk, discussion of Abhidhamma. But here in the translation that I had, I took the word Abhidhamma to have, I said to have a referential function. That is, this prefix abhi can have the meaning related to, pertaining to, in this case, pertaining to the Dhamma. So it could be talk pertaining to the Dhamma. So that's one way to interpret it. Another way, and what's to be noticed, like according to the Theravada tradition, the Buddha expounded the Abhidhamma, but not in the human realm, but in the celestial realm. And then it was brought from the celestial realm down to the human realm. So that's the traditional Theravadan belief. But of course, scholars recognize a historical development of the Abhidhamma over several centuries following the passing away of the Buddha. But it's possible that, you see, we always find when the suttas speak about Abhidhamma, it always occurs in connection with discussions amongst the monks. It's not the Buddha expounding the Abhidhamma, but monks are engaged in Abhidhamma kata, in discussion of Abhidhamma. So this could be perhaps the monks are engaged in a more technical discussion, sort of exploring in more technical details, sort of refined and difficult knotty points that arise out of the Buddha's own discourses. Okay, so this is Abhidhamma kata. Then the other term that we have here, which I had translated as questions and answers, but that's a rather maybe free and arbitrary rendering, is Vedala kata. This is an obscure term of which we don't have a clear explanation, clear definition, which comes to play a very important role in the development of Buddhism. In the Pali Suttas, the Pali Nikayas, there are two suttas which have the word Vedala in the title. These are in the Majjhima Nikaya number 43 and 44. The Mahavedala, that's the larger Vedala Sutta, And the Chula, number 44, is the Chula Vedala Sutta, the shorter Vedala Sutta. But we have to remember that those titles are assigned to the suttas by the compilers of the text. Those suttas themselves don't use the word Vedala. And so the word Vedala comes in different Buddhist traditions, comes rendered and interpreted in different ways. Let me see if I could find. How do I type here? Anyway, okay, I won't be able to write it. But the word Vedala comes at one point to be rendered as Vetula, which means unequaled, unmeasured, and then it turns into Vipula, from Vedala to Vipula. Vipula means expanded. And then the word Vipula comes to be a designation that the founders of Mahayana Buddhism used to designate the Mahayana Sutras. And so the Mahayana Sutras are called Vipula, Vipulya Sutras, Vipula Sutras. This is I don't remember the Chinese term that's used. And so this idea of a Vedala Suttas became a rather controversial issue in the development of Buddhism. Okay, and here it's said that from these discussions, these talk pertaining to the Dhamma and talk Vedala Kata. Maybe Vedala we could take as maybe miscellaneous talk. So through these kind of discussions, the monks slide into a dark Dharma that they will not recognize. And what that dark Dharma is not identified in the sutta itself. But anyway, this is said to be a danger of the future. Okay, now another interesting passage. We have here, this is number 4. Okay, again, we have monks who are undeveloped in conduct, in body, conduct, mind, and wisdom. And when those discourses spoken by the Tathagata, by the Buddha, are being recited that are deep, deep in meaning, world transcending, connected with emptiness, they will not want to listen to them, will not lend an ear to them or apply their minds to understand them. They will not think that those teachings should be studied and learned. Before I go on, I just have to take a little break. This is something that happens when you get older. It's a danger in the future, but ooh. Okay, I didn't break it. Okay, it's working okay. Okay, so now we have discourses spoken by the Tathagata. Key word here is connected with emptiness. It's sunyata pati sangyutta. So here you can see the passage is putting very strong emphasis on the importance of those suttas connected with emptiness. But when these discourses are being spoken, being recited, this would be like at a later time after the passing away of the Buddha, when some monks are reciting them, then the other monks, maybe at that point the majority, won't want to listen to them, won't lend an ear to them or try to understand them. They don't want to study and learn those teachings. But when other discourses are being recited, apparently not discourses of the Buddha, but discourses that are mere poetry composed by poets, beautiful in words and phrases, created by outsiders. And outsiders is like a technical term used in the suttas to refer to those who are like the non-Buddhist teachers, contemporaries of the Buddha, like the teachers of the Jainism, the Jain teachers, the Brahminic teachers, and so on. And then we have a rather odd phrase, spoken by disciples, savaka bhasitam. And I say that it's odd because usually the word savaka, as disciple, is spoken, when the Buddha uses it, he uses it in a positive sense as referring to his own noble disciples. But here it's almost like criticizing discourses spoken by disciples. Okay, so when these discourses, which are really just poetic compositions, beautiful poetic compositions, but without deep, pithy meaning are being spoken, then the monks, that is what the monks will want to listen to, and they'll try to understand them, and they'll study them, and learn them, and recite them. So what's being indicated here, and it's a bit of a, I have to say, a bit enigmatic. And this particular type of passage was then later used by the proponents of the Prajnaparamita Sutras, which are the Mahayana sutras that expound emptiness, to say, you see, this is what the Buddha was emphasizing as the importance of the Prajnaparamita Sutras. And strangely, in the Pali Canon, we don't find the term emptiness used very often in relation to suttas. There are two suttas in the Majjhima Nikaya, which deal with the theme of emptiness. One, emptiness as a kind of high meditative state. Actually, they both deal with emptiness as a high meditative state, but not especially a penetrating experience of wisdom. And then there's a very short sutta in the Samyutta Nikaya in which the Buddha explains how the world is empty, that it's empty of a self or what belongs to a self. And so we just have these very few suttas which mention emptiness in the Pali Canon. And yet here, the text is placing very strong emphasis on them, like this is the key to preserving the proper Dhamma. So probably the way we would understand this is that what is meant, but I think this is what the commentary explains. Emptiness means the absence of a self So it would be like all of the discourses dealing with non-self would come under the heading of emptiness. Okay, so this is the fourth danger of the future. That the lack of attention to the discourses connected with emptiness that are deep, deep in meaning and world transcending. And then the fifth danger in the future, in a way, this seems rather similar to the first dangers. So here we have the elder monks who are undeveloped in conduct, body, conduct, mind, and wisdom, become luxurious and lax. That is, they no longer devoting themselves to strenuous striving in meditative development. They backslide, and they don't go off into solitude, and they don't devote themselves, arouse energy to attain what they have not yet attained, to achieve what they have not yet achieved, to realize what they have not yet realized. And then those in the next generation follow their example. They become lax. They discard the duty of solitude. They don't arouse energy. And so it goes on from generation to generation. Okay, and so these are the 5 dangers of the future, not yet arisen, that will arise in the future. And you should recognize them and make an effort to abandon them. Okay, maybe we should take some questions. And the way you would raise the question is by, if you're online, if you're here in the room, you could raise a real hand made of flesh, blood, and bone. If you are online, then you use the raise hand symbol on the Zoom. So do I see any real hands? Okay, Stephen.
Thank you, Bhante. My question is, I mean, as you know, we find several of these kinds of suttas which predict a later degenerate age, which I have to admit, I kind of find annoying. But my question is, should we take these texts as sort of predictions about the future, or rather more just warnings about our own personal practice?
Okay, so I'll repeat the question for those online. So he's asking whether we should take these suttas about like the dangers in the future as real predictions about what is going to happen in the future, or as sort of guidelines for our own personal practice. Yeah, I don't see this as necessarily an either or, as either or alternatives, but we might see them, look at them as in both ways. And here you can see from the injunction that comes at the end of each statement that the Buddha is issuing this as an injunction to the life, to the monks of his time, that they should recognize this danger and make an effort to prevent it from erupting. But also at the present day, we could see this as admonitions to ourselves, particularly those of us who are monks, not to let ourselves become undeveloped in body, conduct, mind, and wisdom, not to become lax and luxurious, and to lay down the burden of solitude and the striving to reach what we have not yet reached. But also, this, I have to say, this does become something of almost, to be honest, like sometimes one thinks that these passages are just too gloomy, too grim, too pessimistic about the future of Buddhism. But you could see things like this really happening as Buddhism develops, particularly when it's becomes supported by the king in lavishing luxurious gifts on the monasteries, lands, property, even, sadly to say, slave labor to work the property and to serve in the monasteries. the monks become kind of like patrician aristocrats who live very luxurious lives, and they think it's enough just to pass on some knowledge of the text. And even the suttas come to be put into the background, and a lot of emphasis comes to be placed on these, as the sutta says, these poetic works composed in later times, sort of glorifying and extolling the virtues of the Buddha. And they seem to relish those particular works. The passages in which the maidens of the palace, when Prince Siddhartha is considering renunciation, the way the women of his harem try to tempt him and persuade him not to renounce by using all of their feminine wiles to sort of tie him fast to the luxurious life of the palace. And the composers of those poems are monks, and how do the monks know all of this? Yeah, anyway, so we could see it, read them in both ways. Yeah, but like, in fact, within, say, the life of the Sangha, say in the history of Sri Lanka, there's this pattern of sort of decay and degeneration, where the monks become, and now I use the word monks because this is a period after the order of nuns has vanished from Sri Lanka. They become increasingly more, because of all of the respect and veneration given to them and the lavish gifts given to them, they become lax and luxurious. And they become holding monasteries, are gifted large tracts of land to generate the revenue to support the monasteries. And so the monastic life becomes a rather easy life for many people. So that's like one phase in the pattern. And then there'll come a group of monks who react against that and then go off into the forest to lead very austere, diligent lives in the forest. So that leads to the emergence of a movement of forest monasticism. And then the forest monks probably generate a lot of respect and veneration from the lay people, who then lavish gifts on the forest monks, and then the forest monasteries become very comfortable and convenient places to live. And so the decay sets into the forest monastic life. And then at a later time, another group of monks will break away and form a forest monastic community. So we have that pattern, that kind of oscillation between laxity and luxurious living and austerity and diligent striving. Okay, I want to take some of the other questions. So any questions here? Okay, so let us see the hands online. So Gita has the hand raised.
Thank you, Bhante. Thanks for teaching the Dhamma. Bhante, I have a question on the Abhidhamma.
Yeah.
When I attended your retreat, my understanding at that time was Buddhajanan Vahanse went to teach the Dhamma to his biological mom, and he had to come back to his body in order to sustain the aggregates by taking his meal. And he had confided in, I think, Sariputta on where he was and what he was doing. So I was thinking that he would have told all the suttas that he taught the devas to Sariputta, and Sariputta perhaps conveyed that to Ananda, who held the key in the first council. Like Sariputta would have mentioned this to Ananda in order to preserve the teachings.
I see.
And to send it and to make sure that it gets recorded in like in the first council when they met. I don't know, Bhante, is that a correct way of thinking? What is your understanding of how the Abhidhamma came about?
Yeah, that is a traditional explanation that we find in the Pali commentaries and in the Theravada tradition, that the Buddha, maybe it was the 7th rains retreat after his enlightenment. He wanted to teach the Abhidhamma, and so he went to the Tavatingsa Deva world, making his mother, who had been reborn in the Tusita Deva world, the special recipient of the Abhidhamma. And then the Devas from many Deva worlds gathered in the Tavatingsa Deva world, and there the Buddha taught the Abhidhamma, and then he would expound it continuously, but each day to take his meal, he would have to come down to the human world, and so he would create a sort of duplicate of himself that would remain in the Deva world, continuing to teach the Abhidhamma, but the actual physical Buddha came down and back to the human world, went on alms round, and then after his meal, then he would teach Sariputta the key points that he had expounded in the Deva world, and then Sariputta was the one who elaborated the Abhidhamma and then probably passed it on to Ananda, as you say. But that is a traditional explanation, I think, to kind of give a justification to the Abhidhamma, to try to root it, to confirm it as an authentic verbal teaching from the Buddha himself. But I have to side myself with the view of contemporary, like critical scholars, who see a gradual development over time of teachings that would have crystallized into the canonical Abhidhamma. Because we have several different Abhidhamma systems, not only the Theravada system, which probably was developed in the parts of India where the Theravada school flourished, but in northern India, the Sarvastivada Abhidharma system, and then in the northwest, another Abhidharma system. And so they couldn't have all, and they differ. Maybe they have certain points in common, but they differ in details. So I would think that there would have been maybe an original nucleus of Abhidhamma that maybe developed a century or two after the passing of the Buddha, maybe taking shape during the Buddha's time. And then as the schools flourished in different regions, those fundamental teachings came to be elaborated in different ways till we have the different Abhidharma systems.
So in other words, they kind of started adding stuff to the existing body of work.
I would say so, yeah.
Yeah, but Abhidhamma teachings are amazing, Bhante, because we thoroughly enjoyed your retreat.
Yeah, I think
It's very, very interesting.
That they don't stem directly from the word of the historical Buddha doesn't mean that they're valueless and we just throw them away, because they're very important sort of keys to understanding the functioning of the mind.
Agreed, Bhante.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, so next question will be Samangi Munasingha.
Yes, hi, Bhante. So I have a question in this, what you did today, the corruption of the Dhamma. Yeah. How do we know, given that, we are listening 600 years later, what exactly Buddha came from Buddha's teaching and what is written down in different, how do we know what we are reading is exactly what the Buddha was teaching? For example, even within, I don't know, even within Theravada, sometimes I see contrary things. And for example, I don't think this is not Theravada, but if you go to Borobudur in Indonesia, they have these carvings that teach if you give, I don't know, a bell to the temple, you get a better voice next life, or something very specific. And even the Theravada Thai temples or Laotian temples around where I live, if you go, they're very specific. If you give a roof to the temple, you get some other life, and I just leave. I don't want roof or the other life or anything. But how do we know exactly what Buddha was teaching. I just go by whenever I don't feel it's right for me, I just leave it
Yeah.
at that. But how do we know?
Okay.
Thank you.
To be completely honest, I have to say that we can never have 100% certainty that anything that has come down to us has come from the Buddha himself. All we have are what I would call maybe a probability chart, you could say, ranging from maybe 90% certainty, or probability, 90% probability to 10%, 1% probability, and maybe even complete improbability. So what I would say is those teachings that we find in the, say, in the Sutta Pitaka, that are repeated, that are consistent, we could take as fairly, with a fairly high degree of confidence is coming from the Buddha himself. Say the teachings of the Four Noble Truths, the 5 aggregates, the 3 characteristics of existence, the 12 links of dependent origination, the Noble Eightfold Path, and the other sets in the 37 aids to enlightenment, the Bodhipakkhiya the teachings on, general teachings of karma, results of karma, the working of karma, the different realms of rebirth, the way karma matures in the different realms. Those teachings we see again and again repeated across the suttas. And then for those who do like comparative studies of suttas from the Pali Canon with their counterparts, say in Chinese translation, in Buddhist hybrid Sanskrit, in other languages, Gandhari, other Asiatic languages from that region. So when you do comparisons, you see fair degrees of correspondence. So those you could take as coming from a very early period. So therefore we have like a strata that are called the early Buddhist texts, which even though we can't be certain that they all come exactly as recorded from the Buddha himself, but we could have a high degree of confidence that they come from the very earliest period of Buddhist literary history. And then those teachings, which maybe are not repeated, not consistent, not found in other traditions, those you could raise some doubts about them, but we can't dismiss them offhand just because they might be unique or special. But I would say that the degree of probability that they come from the Buddha himself goes down, correspondingly down.
So how do you
We could use our what I call the critical intelligence, and like certain teachings, like I remember something that I saw coming from the Tibetan tradition, that if anybody sees the script of a certain mantra, that they're guaranteed full liberation after 7 lives. I mean, that just didn't make sense to me. So it seemed to me very improbable. So I would certainly not accept something like that.
So how do you guard your mind against, I feel like when I see all these kind of, I would say, corruptions, my mind becomes the most suspicious thing, and I don't want my mind to go in that direction because I want my mind more purified. So how do I guard against?
Yeah, what I say is to put your primary confidence in those clear, consistent teachings that are repeated across the Nikayas or within a Nikaya, and that pertain to what I call the core of the Dharma. The teachings, as I said, on the nature of reality, the nature of experience, and that provide the foundations for leading the moral and the spiritual life. Those are the core teachings.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll have to take it. Maybe let's see what time we are at now. Okay, I'll try to move quickly through some more questions. So Marcel,
Thank you, Bhante. So we were talking about some corruption of the teachings in some countries. I'm curious, in 2023, which Buddhist countries are the least corrupted?
What?
Which Buddhist countries are the least corrupted?
Oh, I don't want to make any statements about that. If I do, I will be
Okay.
blacklisted. Maybe if I want to visit one of those countries and apply for a visa, they'll look at my name and say, no, we can't have a visa. I don't want to
Okay.
say anything like that.
Fair enough, fair enough.
Okay. Next, UD Ortega.
Hello, Bhante.
Hello.
My question is, I've seen in some monasteries that both monks and nuns are living in the same monastery. Would that lead to a corruption of the Dharma, or is that even allowed in the Vinaya?
It's not prohibited, but the monks and nuns there are places all over where they live in the same monastery, but they should be living in separate quarters within the monastery. You know,
Oh,
not
okay,
having-
yeah.
Excuse me?
No, I'm listening.
Yeah. Like there should be like a separate hall for monks, a separate hall for the nuns. Actually, at Zhuangyan Monastery, we have monks and nuns living in the same monastery. But yeah, the residence for the monks is in one part of the ground. The residence hall for the nuns is a different part of the grounds.
Okay, I see. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you, Bhante.
Yeah, though the next sutta, which I didn't have time to take today, speaks about when monks are living closely together with nuns. Let me just take a quick jump into that passage. Yeah, it says in the future, there will be monks who bond closely with bhikkhunis, that's with female practitioners and novices. When they form such close bonds, then it's possible that they will lead the spiritual life dissatisfied, what it means that yearning for a personal, basically,
Yes, I noticed. So
they'll commit a defiled offense, which means
Yes.
the transgression of sexual activity, give up the training and return to the lay life.
Okay, I see. Yeah, because I thought I read something like that in the Vinaya, and I think that's also why there were a lot of things, you know, like the Buddha used to say something about, you know, like when you are too close to a female or a male, you develop this affection, and you know, so that's why. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, maybe I could just take, I'll just have time, I think, to take one more question. This will be V.
Oh, yes, Bhante, thank you for taking my question. The recent event that's surrounding this Dalai Lama, which I find it very disturbing. I wonder what is the Bhante's view on that?
Okay, so that doesn't directly relate to our discussion today, but just, okay, what I would say is that it's being blown entirely out of proportion, especially the hints that have been given by some commentators that the Dalai Lama is a pedophile, that he's sexually molesting that boy. No truth to that at all. I have to say it was an unwise action on the part of the Dalai Lama. And he should have realized that people are going to try to exploit that in order to slander him and to try to undermine his reputation. It would have been okay for him. The boy wanted to give him a hug or wanted to receive a hug from the Dalai Lama. It would have been nice if the Dalai Lama just gave him a hug and ended it at that. But then the Dalai Lama kissed him and then said, "Suck my tongue," which was, I think, if that is a Tibetan custom, he should have known he's in India and that there are people videoing this who are going to show it even outside India to other parts of the world. I think that there are some forces, I would have to suspect that maybe the Chinese government that is trying to soil the reputation of the Dalai Lama has taken advantage of this and is sort of blowing it up out of all proportion. So that's all I
Thank you.
could say, but we
Thanks.
should not have any suspicion, because the Dalai Lama did this in front of a large crowd of people. If he's trying to engage in some kind of corrupt behavior with the child, he's not going to do it in public view. And with the mother, the boy's mother was standing right nearby, and she was laughing while the Dalai Lama was doing this. And then after, when the Dalai Lama finished talking to the boy, he said to the boy, in future, you should not do anything bad. You should follow the people who are good. So there's no hint at all that the Dalai Lama was intending anything unscrupulous.
Yeah, but there was a previous event with Lady Gaga. I'm not sure whether you've seen the video.
Excuse me?
There was a previous clip with Lady Gaga. Dalai Lama and Lady Gaga. I'm not sure whether you've seen the clip.
No, I never saw that.
Okay, but never
Okay, I
mind.
think we have to end because I will have to go up for the meal now. And now, before we end with the sharing of merit, I should mention next, let's see, this is the 7th. Today is the 6th, actually, the 6th. So the 13th, we won't be having a class. And the 20th, I will have online only. This will be the first in the new series for the Russian speakers, but those who come to the regular class can join that. You join it online. I think the link will be sent out later. I think it will be, I'm not sure if it's the same Zoom link as this one. You could join that. So we'll have that class on the 20th, though it's intended especially for Russian speakers. And it'll be alternating translation into Russian. Then the following Saturday, the 27th, we won't have a class because I won't be here. And so the next class coming from Zhuangyan Monastery will be the first Saturday in June. I think it's June 4th, but check your calendar. Okay, so let us then end. We end with the sharing of the merits. So I'll recite the verses for dedicating the merit. Akasata Jabumata Deva Naga Mahidika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirangra Kantu Sasanam. Akasata Jabumata Deva Naga Mahidika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirangra Kantu Desanam. Akasata Jabumata Deva Naga Mahidika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirangra Kantu Mang Parang. Dukkha pata jani dukkha, baya pata jani baya, soka pata jani soka, hantu sabepi panino. May those in suffering be free from suffering. May those in fear be free from fear. May those in sorrow be free from sorrow. May all living beings also be one. And then we'll end with 3 bows to the Buddha or half bows to the Buddha. And help doing this in real time.
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank
Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.
Bows,
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you,
don't end yet.
Bhante. Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.
And bow to Bhante.
Yeah, I just have some comments, but it's okay. Yeah.